And if you have your Bibles, we are in Job, and we are in Job chapters 29 and 30. We are really making our way through this book, and by the end of the summer, we're going to be finishing up the book of Job. But 29 and 30 is where we're going to be at today, and you're going to want that text in front of you by any means necessary. Get that in front of you, because we're going to kind of walk through this text in such a way that I'll take it one small chunk at a time and just kind of explain and maybe help interpret what's happening here, because being poetic in nature, sometimes it's difficult to understand, but we're going to walk through this passage together. You know, this week I saw one of my favorite pictures of Amanda and the boys, and it was taken 13 years ago, and I really look back at that time in my life as a sweet spot. And I saw this picture last week, and it really started to get me to reminisce about what life was like. And the picture is just a really simple picture that I took one day in Toys R Us. And Reese is just a month old, and so, Emmett's like 2, and Nolan's like 4 or 5. And so Reese is in Amanda's arms, and they got toys on both sides of them in the aisle. She's pushing a Toys R Us cart, and Nolan's like in awe of the toys. Reese is oblivious to everything. He's just, a little guy. And then Emmett is sitting in the shopping cart there. I don't know what he has in his hands. It looks like markers. It looks like he's sniffing markers. But maybe that explains a lot. But it's just a funny picture of us. And every time I see that picture, I think of how easy it was. Man, I think about the problems that I have in my life now as opposed to then. I'm like, what problems did I have? Like that, it was a Friday night, and we went out for pizza. We stopped at Toys R Us. We were probably getting birthday ideas for Nolan's upcoming birthday. And then we went home and watched a movie, had some popcorn, and you fall asleep on the floor with a pile of kids. It was a sweet spot of life. And I look back and I think, what problems did I have then? It's laughable to me to think about the problems that I have. And what was my biggest problem? Probably potty training Emmett was probably, one of my biggest problems at that point. That kid loved to poop his pants more than any kid on the face of the earth. It's so true. It's so true. And potty training Nolan. Oh yeah, I was like, hey, you want to be potty trained now? Nolan's like, yes, sir. And then I was like, this is easy. The parents are idiots. How's this a problem for anybody? And then Emmett comes along to completely humble me when it comes to potty training. We were so desperate to potty train him. That's probably why we were at Toys R Us, to incentivize anything that we could, any progress. Eventually, we got so desperate. Emmett loves animals, and I was like, hey, if you get potty trained, I'll get you a cat. And so to this day, we got that stinking cat. So I'm going to go home tonight, and that old stinky cat will sleep next to me in bed tonight. But that cat is a trophy because I potty trained Emmett. And it's a trophy. So I treasure Daisy, our cat. But we all can look back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and probably somewhere in there identify the sweet spot of life and reminisce and think, man, life was so easy then compared to now. And you have to be careful with that too, because when you start reminiscing like that, it starts to make your current day problems feel even worse than maybe they are, right? I mean, thinking about how easy life was, it didn't feel easy at the time. It felt complicated at the time. But when I look at it from this vantage point, I start to think, man, my problems now, they're a little more daunting now that I think and reflect back on that. They're a little more overwhelming. They feel a little bit more impossible. So you have to be careful how you reminisce in times of old like that. Well, I bring that up to say, here's a good way to think about chapters 29 and chapter 30. In chapter 29, Job is reminiscing about the good old days when life was great. And then in chapter 30, he's thinking about the current plight that he's in and how awful it all is. And so we're going to look at both of those chapters today, and we're going to consider where this leads him emotionally. Where does this lead him spiritually? When he reminisces and then thinks about his problems in light of the past, how does this affect his disposition towards God, considering everything that's happened to him? And it's a really, I think, unique and important place to contemplate in Scripture, because we can be guilty of some of the things that I believe Job is guilty of in chapter 30, because spoiler alert, it takes him to a bad place. When he reminisces in this way and then thinks about where he's at currently, it takes him to a bad place. It does affect his disposition towards God, or his posture towards God, and it affects him in a bad way. And I want you to maybe think about, has that been the case for you? Is that the case for you? Or maybe you prepare yourself in which it will be tempting for that to be the case for you. So let's just look at the first 6 verses here in chapter 29 to get going. And this is Job just starting to reminisce about the good old days. And Job again took up his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were as in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness, as I was in my prime, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were all around me, when my steps were washed with butter, and the rock poured out for me streams of oil." Oh, the good old days. I remember the good old days. Remember, here Job is in a heap of trash. His life's wrecked. He's covered in sores. His friends have been taunting him and being mean to him and overly critical of his life. And from this posture, he's saying, "Oh man, I remember the good old days. I remember the way it was." We remember the good old days for Job too. We remember chapter 1 when it articulated what it was like for Job in the good old days. Thousands of sheep, camels, oxen, donkeys. He had the perfect family, the picture frame family, the family that's in there before you put your family in there, right? I mean, he had the perfect life. It was so good. And God did protect him. And Job is reminiscing about that time in his life, and that's the time in his life that Satan complained about, if you remember in chapter 2 of Job. It was Satan who complained to God. God points out Job, and Satan basically says to God, "Well, yeah, of course his life's awesome. Of course he loves you. You bless everything that he does. He has an amazing life because of you, and that's why he worships you. Take all that away, right? And he's not going to worship you anymore." Job 1:10, this is how Satan says it. "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? Have you blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land?" So Satan complained about that reality. Job's here reminiscing about it. It's like, "Oh man, I remember those days. I was in my prime." Now, I had to text this verse to Adam Kinsey last week, because if you know Adam, anytime you ask Adam how he's doing, he's like, "I'm in my prime." He'll be 80 years old, and you'll ask him how he's doing, and say, "Oh, I'm in my prime." He's got his shirt on today that even says it. We were laughing about it, because I texted him, I was like, "Hey, dude, I just found your life verse." It's Job 29. Let's see, what was it? Job 29:4, "As I was in my prime." But man, that was Job. He truly was in his prime in those days. And I love the imagery that he uses here that's a little confusing to our ears in verse 6, when he's summarizing what it felt like to be in his prime. He's saying everything went my way. You know, butter and oil, he uses the illustration of butter and oil because those were luxury items. If you had butter and you had oil, you were living the high life back in the day. And he's like, "Man, my life, every step I took was like butter," right? Every step was just amazing. It was cushioned with butter. Even the rocks in Job's life produced oil, like olive oil or something for him. Everything he touched turned to gold. He had the Midas touch in his day. So, you know, he didn't just prosper financially. He didn't just prosper as far as his family was concerned. The entire community, we will learn here next, are people who prospered just being in the presence of Job. Look at 7 through 10. "When I went out to the gate of the city, when I prepared my seat in the square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood. The princes refrained from talking and laid their hand on their mouth. The voice of the nobles was hushed, and their tongue stuck to the roof of their mouth." I mean, he's saying here, man, I remember the good old days when I'd show up to the town square where everybody gathered and, you know, maybe debated or talked about things or dealt with the problems of the community. When I showed up, people recognized. That's just the way it was. The young men there, when they saw me coming in, the young men would be basically like, oh man, wait, Job's here. He's important. I'll get out of the way. The important people are here. Let Job have a seat. He's the one we really want to hear when it comes to the town square. Even the nobles and the princes, they had great respect for Job. They were going to give up, they're going to stand and rise, right? Even the aged, the old people, they're going to stand and rise because Job is here, and we respect Job. So they sat up straight. They paid attention. His presence had that sort of impact on people. That was Job's reality. That was Job in his prime. And it wasn't like a fear-driven respect either. There's lots of different ways perhaps to respect one another. But this was an honor-driven respect. He had such an honorable life that you couldn't help but appreciate and admire and esteem Job. And that's the impact that he had on these people when he was there. Look at verses 11 through 16. It tells you a little bit why and what type of respect they had for him. When the ear heard, it called me blessed. And when the eye saw, it approved. Why? Because I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to help him. The blessing of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I searched out the cause of him whom I did not know. Job is saying, I leveraged everything that I had, all of my affluence, I leveraged to help other people and think about their needs. I was in a position of authority, and I was in a position to be a very generous person, so I was. I utilized that opportunity that I had uniquely in my life. I was blessed, and so I made sure and blessed those around me. It was impressive. He could have been this greedy Scrooge in life. He could have been everything basically that Eliphaz accused him of being. If you remember his complaints and accusations against Job back in chapter 22. That was a month ago now that we studied that. But if you remember, this is the opposite of everything Eliphaz said about Job. Eliphaz was basically coming up, he was fabricating these lies to accuse Job. Surely, their assumption all of this time is that he's been living this wicked life, and so he deserves all of the ruin that he lives in. And so since they didn't have any proof, they just started lying. And Eliphaz is the one who does it. He was basically saying, Job, you never helped the poor. That's why you're in the plight that you're in. You never helped the widow. You never helped the fatherless. You never helped those who were suffering. That's why God ruined your life. So as Job is here reminiscing before his friends and before God ultimately, he's still giving his defense. He's saying, no, actually, Eliphaz, when I think about my life back in my prime, all of these accusations you're making against me, it's just the opposite is true. That's precisely the reason that people respected me. It's because of who I was. It's because I did deliver the poor from their bad circumstances. I did help the fatherless. I went out of my way to help those who were perishing. I went out of my way to help the widow. That was what I was known for. I was known for being generous with what I had. I was known for being someone who took care of other people. People came to me for help. They respected me, and I helped them because that's who I was. He didn't just help them with money. He helped them with his influence and power. Just look at verse 17. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made him drop his prey from his teeth. I didn't just help people who had a bad year. I helped protect those people from the people you were trying to say that I was. If you remember Eliphaz back in chapter 22, he accused Job of being a loan shark, essentially. He accused Job of loaning money to people and then trying to charge them this exorbitant amount of interest, and which was a major no-no in the Old Testament, a major no-no for God's people. In the law, you were explicitly told not to loan out money and charge interest like that. Well, Eliphaz accused Job of that, and he's like, man, just the opposite is true. I protected people from people like that. I especially didn't do that. I wasn't a loan shark. And of course, all of those things were a lie. All of those things were a lie. Let's continue in 18 through 20. I think this is where it gets really interesting and perhaps even convicting if you allow it to be. In verse 18 through 20, he says, "Then I thought," that's something I would circle if you're the type of person that writes in your Bible. Then I thought, what did he think? Then I thought, I shall die in my nest. I shall multiply my days as the sand. My roots spread out to the waters, with the dew all night on my branches. My glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. He's reminiscing about the days of old, and he's saying, I went out of my way to help those in need. I was respected by all of those around me. I was living this really, really good life, doing a lot of good things. So you know what I thought? He says, I thought I would die in my nest. I thought I would die securely. He gives the imagery of a bird in his nest. I thought I would just, live this life and build this nice household and this home where I could just nestle up in there and live out my days, live a long life and just die right there in the security of my home that I worked so hard and respectably to build. I thought that I would just, since I had this blessing throughout my days in my prime, that I would continue to have that blessing into my retirement perhaps, that I would just be set up and my roots would be spread to the water and there'd be vitality there and it would truly be my golden years and in the greatest way possible with my glory fresh in me. He says, my bow ever new in my hand. You think of a bow and arrow and you think of using a bow and arrow over and over and over and over, and eventually that cord on that bow may get loose or the bow itself may break and be worthless. But Job's like, I thought, having lived this honorable life that people can respect and that glorified God, I just thought, silly me, I thought that in my older days that bow would just be constantly new, that it would never wear out because I was doing the right thing. I should be able to get what I deserve. And we know that Job didn't get what he thought. He thought wrong, right? If I had to rename chapter 30, I would name it Job Thought Wrong. Because that's not what Job is experiencing in his life, is it? We all have kind of this default setting in our theology. Everybody's a theologian, right? There's even a book that's really good, a book titled That's Really Good to Read. Everybody has thoughts on God, and so when you have any thoughts on God or opinions on God, you're functionally a theologian, right? You're considering God. We all have this default setting when we think about our relationship with God, that if I live according to God's standard of righteousness, and if I do the right things, if I make the right decision in my life, even if it's harder than making the bad decision, and I'm an honorable and respectable person, well, then good things are going to happen in my life. That's what we all believe. And there's some truth to that, right? There's some truth to that, because if you do the right things in your life, good things are going to happen in the sense that there are boundaries within the law of God that are set to protect his people and cause them to thrive. And if you go beyond those boundaries, especially those boundaries of morality, bad things can and will happen. And so there's enough truth to that belief that we sometimes cling to it and dig our claws in too deep to that truth. We hold on to it too tightly. Because the truth of the matter is, that isn't necessarily true. You can do the right thing, you can live the right way, you can live this life of righteousness, and bad things can happen. Because we know bad things do happen to good people. That's what this book is teaching us about. And so this is why when I mentioned getting into Job from the get-go, this is one of those books of the Bible that it keeps you off balance, because it takes one of these pillar beliefs that we have by default and it kind of kicks it down. And then you're wobbly. Like, wait, bad things happen. I can do the right thing and God may allow bad things to happen to me. What do I do with that? Well, we're reading the book of Job because it's helping us to understand what we do with that. And that's why it's so important. And it's a shame that this book is often neglected because of that very thing, that we really need to know what we're going to do, right? I think good things are going to happen to me if I live rightly. Well, why would you think something like that? That's what the book of Job says to us. Let's keep going, and we'll come back to that thought momentarily. Job's getting back to reminiscing here in 21 through 23. Men listened to me and waited and kept silent for my counsel. After I spoke, they did not speak again. And my word dropped upon them. They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouths as for the spring rain. I smiled on them when they had no confidence, and the light of my face they did not cast down. I chose their way and sat as chief. And I lived like a king among his troops, like one who confronts mourners. See, Job is saying, man, back in my prime, when I spoke, people listened. They listened because they knew it was worth it. And when I spoke, problems were solved. They'd all be in the town square trying to find a solution, but when I showed up, they stood up and listened, and after they heard what I had to say, they knew what to do. They could be faced with an issue in which they had no confidence whatsoever. They were beginning to lose hope, but I would just smile at them, and my presence and my smile would comfort them in such a way that they would think, man, this is all going to get figured out. We got Job here now. Whew. What a relief. I love verse 23. His words are described like the spring rain, much like I spoke of earlier when I opened the services. That's why it was on my mind. You know, you think in the spring how that rain just brings life, and that his words they brought life. He just brought peace. When he spoke, people felt peace. They felt at ease. They felt, man, our leader's here, and he's good, and we're thankful for him. Those good old days were really good for Job, and they're long gone at this point. This is a portion of the Bible that, again, I would say in chapter 30, I would just title it, Job Thought Wrong. You know, the first 10 verses, we're going to see Job start to complain about his current circumstance. And it gets ugly. It gets ugly, but remember, Job is human. Don't forget that. He's blameless and upright. He's a righteous man, but he's a man, okay? He's not perfect. He's going to say some hard things. He's going to complain, and even the best of us in here, when everything's going wrong, complaining feels good, right? And some of you are expert complainers. I'm the first and foremost. I get in a bad mood. I can complain better than any of you. I can out-complain you, I promise. Just ask Amanda when I get going. I can complain. I'll complain you under a table. If you go toe-to-toe complaining with me, I'll devastate you. I can complain. Well, Job gets going here, and there's a part of me that's like, well, it's kind of relief. Okay, Job can complain too, all right? Even the best of us can be complainers. Look at the first verse, how he gets going, how he starts to paint the picture for us as to where he's at now. But now, they laugh at me, men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. I just want to flesh that out so you can appreciate the slam that he just said. He's like, man, the people now my circumstance, even young people laugh at me. I'm talking about not just the young people, the scumbags amongst the young people. Those people. The people who laugh at me are the people who I wouldn't even trust their parents to watch my dogs if I was on vacation. Now that's saying something now, because we love our dogs, right? If you go away and you got somebody watching your dogs, you're going to get somebody trustworthy. You're going to get somebody who you know is going to pamper your little baby, right? Because we have dogs as pets. That's not happening in this text. Dogs are not pets. We always have to, I feel like I have to say that every time we see the term dog used in Scripture. These are scavengers. These are expendable varmints that you could kill for fun. Not a big deal. They're just a nuisance at best. So he's saying, the people who laugh at me now, I wouldn't even let the responsible people in their lives even take care of the stuff that I don't care about in my life. And yet, here they are laughing at me. Because as far as the totem pole of society goes, I'm lower than them. I'm lower than them. Look at 2 through 4. What could I gain from the strength of their hands? Men whose vigor is gone. Through want and hard hunger, they gnaw the dry ground by night in the waste and desolation. They pick saltwort and the leaves of bushes and the roots of the broom tree for their food. He's saying basically all of these people who are now above me on the societal food plane or totem pole or whatever, they couldn't help me if they wanted to. They don't have anything. They don't have anything to offer me, even if they did change their mind and not want to make fun of me and laugh at me. They couldn't help me if they wanted to. And yet I am below them. This is a far cry from those days when he used to walk into a room and the young men gave him their seat. Oh, here, Mr. Job, you can have my seat. We want to hear what you have to say. Now the scumbags who wouldn't even think to do something like that, they're just laughing at him. He's a laughing stock. 5-8, they are driven. He's still talking about these people that he's below. They are driven out from human company. They shout after them as after a thief. In the gullies of the torrents they must dwell, in holes of the earth and of rocks. Among them bushes they bray, under the nettles they huddle together. A senseless and nameless brood, they have been whipped out of the land. He's basically continuing to paint this picture, saying this scum of the earth that laughs at me now. Again, they don't have anything. They're the type of people that you would treat like the riffraff. Get out of here. You're gonna bring us all down or steal from us or something. Get out. Go away. He said, I'm below those people now. He says in verses 9 and 10, and now I have become their song. I am a byword to them. They abhor me. They keep aloof from me. They do not hesitate to spit at the sight of me. Boy, that would be the ultimate way to disrespect someone, even in our day, but especially in that day too. Just you spit at them. Right? So people who are miserable like that, the scumbag that he's talking about, he's like, I'm below them on the food chain. But the scumbag that he's talking about, they're the miserable people in society, the people that are just miserable all the time and just take. People like that, I tell you, miserable people love when other people are miserable, right? They find so much satisfaction that other people are miserable like them. And so when it happens, the greater the fall, the more satisfaction they receive. And the more they can laugh at someone else's expense, right? The more fun they're having. And so here Job, living this great life, falls further than anyone's ever fallen before, all the way to the bottom of the ladder. And they're just loving it. And there's no risk whatsoever to spit at Job, because no one cares. That's how low he's sunk. And they're just getting enjoyment out of kicking him while he's down. They wouldn't even think of helping someone like that. And someone of their ilk would not even consider helping someone who was down and out like Job. And Job's thinking, man, I'm their funnest thing to think about right now. Like, if that's what they appreciate about life, misery in the lives of others, I'm bringing them more joy than anybody right now because I'm below them on the food chain. Why does Job believe he has gotten to where he's gotten? We've got the answer to that question several times through the book of Job up to this point, but he's going to answer that again. Verse 11, I'm just going to read the first part of it. And I'll ask the question first. Why has Job ended up here? Well, here's how he would say it. Because God has loosed my cord and humbled me. It's because God has done it. I'm here because of God. He's said that over and over and over again. He bypasses all of the other plausible explanations and explanations that are people groups around him and things like that he could be blaming. But he goes straight to the top. I'm here because of God. God is why I'm suffering like this. And this is classic Job. He just goes right to the sovereignty of God. He goes there to vent his emotions, but he also goes there to find comfort. And so there's a blend of these two things happening, and that is the wisdom of Job. Well, we're going to see one side of it today, the part where you complain. You know, when Job says, God has loosed my cord and humbled me. There's something we can't see. Your translation may even say bowstring, because you remember in the previous chapter he talks about, I just thought whenever I grow old, man, my bow and arrow will be forever new. My bowstring will be tight all the time, and I'll just live out this great life, like an honorable, respectable, and vivacious life in my old years. But now God has loosed his cord. Now that bowstring is worthless. You can't shoot anything with that bow. He's like, God did that. God loosed my cord and humbled me. And so because of that, to finish verse 11, they have cast off restraint in my presence. There's nothing dangerous about Job now. Someone who lives a respectable life and is respected by a great number of people, you might want to pay attention because you want to be careful around that person. Right? It matters what I say and how I act around this person, so I'm going to sit up straight and, okay, bring my A game. It's not like that now, Job says. Because God loosed my cord, there's no risk saying whatever you want around me. There's no risk at all spitting at my face. Zero risk. And that's why these scumbags do it every day. They sing about me, they laugh at me, they make fun of me. All at my expense because there's no consequence now. There is nothing to fear about me. He goes on here in 12 through 15. On my right hand the rabble rise. They push away my feet. They cast up against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path. They promote my calamity. They need no one to help them. As though a wide breach they come. Amid the crash they roll on. Terrors are turned upon me. My honor is pursued as by the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud. He's basically saying, on one hand, I got God who has rendered me useless. He's loosed my cord. And on the other hand, I got this mob of scumbags who laugh at me every single day, and that is my life. That's my life now. I've gone from this confident, caring, powerful man to a sniveling, feeble, fearful man. God did it. I'm a shell of who I once was. God loosed my cord. 16 through 19. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold of me. The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. With great force my garment is disfigured. It binds me about like the collar of my tunic. God has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. Now, when you hear Job start to complain about God, we get to see this from our vantage point, right? We have a unique vantage point. We've been able to read chapters 1 and 2. Job wasn't privy to those conversations between God and Satan, as we keep reminding one another about. He doesn't know all of the things that we know about his circumstance. So from his vantage point, here's how he'd describe what's happening to him. From our vantage point, we'd say, well, God has allowed this. There's a purpose for it. From his vantage point, when you're the one that's in the oven, when you're the one that's in the pit, and you're the one that knows about the sovereignty of God, he's like, man, it's like God took me by the shirt collar and just threw me down into the mud, ruined my life. Whew. He's starting to talk about God like he's a bully. Now, this is when the wisdom of Job starts to get a little sketchy. This is when the wisdom of Job, he starts complaining, and you're like, whoa, tap the brakes, Job, easy, man. Don't talk about God like he's this big, mean bully in the sky. That would confirm all of the fears of so many people and what they think about God. Be careful what you're saying here, Job. But he's just saying how he feels. He's just saying it out loud. He's saying things out loud that other people would be afraid to say out loud. Look what he says in verses 20 through 23. He's saying to God, I cry to you for help and you do not answer me. I stand and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. You lift me up on the wind. You make me ride on it. And you toss me about in the roar of the storm. For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all the living. You're just going to kill me. Verse 21 is astounding to me whenever I dive into what's happening in 21, when Job's saying to God, like, you've turned cruel to me. You've persecuted me. You start to look at the words in the original language it was written in, and you gain an appreciation for just how far Job is going right here. That word persecute, it's satam. That would be the transliteration of it in our language, S-A-T-A-M, satam. Well, that's really close. That's just one letter away from Satan, which is a word for hate or a devil or Satan, right? And in the Hebrew, it is also just one letter away because those words are very closely related. And Job is using very strong terminology here to describe how he feels God is treating him. He's saying to God, it's like you're being a devil to me. It's like you hate me or something. He says this out loud. This is in the Bible. This is why I wish people would read the Bible and how relatable it is and how relevant it truly is. You ever heard somebody talk like this? I've shared some stories throughout our time in the book of Job, and I've heard it several times. And sometimes when I hear people really shaking their fist at God and complaining about God, those are the moments in which I feel like I cringe the most, like, oh, don't say that. But at the same time, when I hear people talk like that towards God, sometimes I think, well, in some ways I think they have the courage to say out loud what I know that I've felt before deep down inside my heart, and I'm ashamed of. I just didn't say it out loud. Because the truth of the matter is, I think a lot of us have felt that way. Maybe you feel that way right now. Why are you being cruel to me? And when we shake our fist at God, like, why are you doing this to me, or why are you allowing this to happen, we feel like God is being unjust towards us. And the reason we feel he is being unjust towards us, if you've orchestrated this rain cloud to follow me around every single day, God, maybe you forgot all the good things that I've done in my life. I'm not so bad. I can think of a lot of people who are a lot worse than me. If you saw what they're doing, you'd look at me and think, man, okay, let's move the rain cloud over there on them. They deserve it. I don't. I owe better. You owe me. You owe me better than that. That's why we have those thoughts. You wouldn't say it out loud like that. People that shake their fist at God would never say it out loud like that because they're not going to be in the wrong. They would never consider themselves being in the wrong. But Job, he'll just say it out loud, right? He's not afraid to say it out loud. Look at 24 through 26. Yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand and a disaster cry for help? And that's Job right now. I'm crying out for help. Here, I'm doing what I should reasonably be doing, God. And then look how he tries to convince God to help him in 25. Did I not weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? Hey, God, remember back in the good old days when I had that hedge of protection around my life and I was living rightly and doing all the good things? Man, when I saw somebody in need, I sure would help them. And I did that to honor you. Well, when I look back on my life and see someone that was needy and my soul grieved for them, I just stand up before you crying out, you just look at me. You don't do anything. Look at verse 26. But when I hoped for good, evil came. And when I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. I go about darkened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I am a brother of jackals, a companion of ostriches. My skin turns black and falls from me. My bones burn with heat. My lyre is turned to mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. You know, God, when I was able to do good, I sure did good. You could do good in my life right now, but you're not. It's almost in a way, he's almost saying, shame on you, God. Like a lot of times when you read in the book of Job, he's an optimist in an incredible way. Not today, though, at all. He's in great turmoil. He's not feeling it. And he's tempted to think he's morally superior to God. And when we're tempted with that same thought, I can tell you, that's when you're going to lose hope. I mean, can you imagine? You think you're morally superior to God, who is the standard for morality, righteousness? You're going to shame him? You're going to tell him you could do it better? The moment you start having thoughts like that and thinking that you're superior to God, it's long gone, it's over. Job's starting to slip into that right now. And it's a great opportunity for you and I to ask ourselves this really important question. When God doesn't help you in the way that you think he should help you, what's that going to do to your disposition towards him? That's a real important answer to have. What's that going to do to you and how you think about God when things don't go your way? Because let me just tell you, as you live out your life, God's not going to help you like you think he should every single time. He's not going to help you in ways that you would help you if you were in his position. And so what are you going to do with that? When you inevitably become frustrated in God's ways, in God's thoughts, and how he carries things out according to his providence and sovereignty, what's that going to do to your disposition towards him? This is a great time to analyze ourselves. The three things that I really appreciate about this text, one is I'm just so thankful that we get to see where Job's head goes here in chapter 30. Like he goes to a really bad place. And again, I mentioned this earlier, that's a relief to me. Like it shows me that even someone with a great amount of wisdom, even someone with great faith, still doesn't have perfect faith. They're human. And Job is human. And so sometimes his faith is great and is amazing, and what an incredible example of faith it is. Even as amazing as it is, sometimes it's just sloppy. Sometimes it's just ugly. Because he's human. He's a fallen human being. And this is a moment in which it's just real sloppy, ugly faith. But that fills me, strangely, with assurance. Maybe there's hope for me. Because I'm way sloppier than that in my faith and how it looks and sounds from day to day. Maybe there's hope for us. Second thing I'm really appreciative about this is I'm thankful for the vantage point that we get to observe this suffering in Job's life, right? Because it helps me to reasonably examine my own heart when I inevitably start to share these feelings in my own life. When I inevitably start to think, man, I've lived a really good life. I've done a lot of really good things. I've surely built up a lot of credit towards God. And so when things do go bad, when I have a bad day, I can cash in some of those chips and God will fix it all for me because of all the stuff I've done for him. I'm tempted to think that too. It's default setting in my life. No matter how much I know that's not true all the time, I go to that default setting so easily when things aren't playing out the way that I want them to. And I can't control it and make it happen the way that I want it to. I'm starting to think, man, I've been trying so hard, God. What does it do to your heart? Are you tempted to think you can cash in chips? Why would you think something like that? Remember, if that's true, if that's the way this works, then Satan was right all along. His complaint about Job was he only worships you because of what you do for him. Take that stuff away. Don't give him what he wants. Don't fix his life, and he won't worship you anymore. So if we adopt this belief that we know is faulty, we're going to prove Satan right in our lives. That's going to be what's not true about Job. Job ultimately will end up being true about us if we get into that frame of mind and start thinking, hey, come on, God, you owe it to me. You're in my debt. I've done a lot of good for you. I've been trying to make it all about you. Can it be about me just for one day? We start talking like that, right? Satan's right about us if we start acting like that. The third thing that I'm really thankful for about this is that it shows you where humiliation and shame can take you in your head. Here's ultimately the emotions I feel like Job is trying to articulate in chapter 30. He's humiliated. When I think about where I was compared to where I am, it's humiliating. It's shameful. I'm at the very bottom. I'm below the scumbags. If you get to that place where you're humiliated and shame and full of shame, what's it going to do to you? Is it going to tempt you to think you're morally superior to God? Is it going to tempt you to go to a bad place? Well, Job shows us, ultimately, that humiliation and shame can take us a different route. Because, spoiler alert, he doesn't ultimately take this route. In Job's wisdom, we can learn that these feelings, these emotions of humiliation and shame, they can actually drive us towards God, not away from them. And of course, the ultimate example of this is the cross, right? The humiliation of Christ is what brings about his greatest exaltation. As he's crucified on the cross, unjustly and humiliated in the worst way imaginable, the Son of God is there enduring what it is that we exalt him for. He's securing our salvation. There's purpose in the humiliation. There's purpose in that shame. He's bearing all of our shame and all of our sin on the cross. And that's what makes us acceptable to God. Let's take that thought and let's weigh it against what's going on in our hearts and minds and remember the gospel in a time of communion now. Let's pray. Lord, again, we thank you so much for the book of Job. We thank you for these difficult moments. We're thankful for this picture of sloppy, ugly faith and complaining. Perhaps nothing's more relatable to us because we're often such complainers. But Lord, help us to understand this in such a way that we could tweak how we believe, that we could fight against the temptation to sinfully think we're superior to you or know better than you or could counsel you in any way. Lord, may this drive us to humility before you, that we could exalt you and glorify you despite what's going on in our life, because we have reason to trust you, that you have purpose in it. Father, thank you for giving us this vantage point that we can consider the purpose, the greater picture, that we can have some clarity there and have reason for peace now as we continue to endure what it is that we may be going through today. In Jesus' name we pray.